For those of you, I think I know most of you, but those of you who don't know me, I'm Julia Hanigsberg. I'm the VP Administration and Finance. I'm going to be talking about the draft academic plan, but more specifically, talking about values-based leadership, values-based careers, and the draft academic plan that you all are very aware of. So I'm going to start us off by talking about 3 values. And the reason I wanted to talk about academic freedom, collegiality, and enterprising in particular is because in some ways, particularly the first 2, but perhaps all 3, might seem to this group, depending on what you do in your day-to-day job, they might seem like they don't apply that much to you. They might seem like they're values that are particularly applicable to the academic colleagues rather than the administrative teams across the university. And they might be harder to think about in the context of what you do for a living. And what I want to argue and what I want to do some talking to you about, very much in the nature of brainstorming, not in the nature of I'm an expert and I'm going to tell you what these things mean. But I want to give you some food for thought and some food for conversation about how these values are incredibly important to everything you do every day. So academic freedom, as you see from the definition, encompasses not only freedom of expression, freedom of speech, thought and expression, within a culture of mutual respect. And that freedom of thought and expression is in support of teaching and learning and research as well. So the sort of obvious piece of it is freedom of expression, but how is academic freedom different than just freedom of expression? I think we all understand freedom of expression. We know that that's a freedom, a charter-protected right in all of our lives. But what is different about academic freedom? What's important in a university, or one of the things that's critically important in a university, and one of the, in a sense, hallmarks of a university, it sets apart a university from a high school, it sets apart a university from most other institutions, is this notion of academic freedom. And it's deeply connected to our mission, to the idea that a university is about creation and dissemination of knowledge through teaching and through research and dissemination of that research. And that the context of academic freedom gives to the academic colleague the right, the authority, the ability to guide their research, to guide their teaching. That is not only what they're expected to do, but it's what they're protected and enabled to do through everything the university is about. So it means that while you might have certain things you're interested as a university strategically in achieving, we think of ourselves as an innovation university, we don't direct the academic colleagues. We don't say to researcher A, your research must be in this area, or to faculty member B, you have to teach this area. Academic freedom is also deeply entrenched in the concept of tenure. And the concept of tenure, that once you've achieved that rank as a faculty member, is to protect the dissemination of knowledge, the creation of knowledge around controversial ideas, to protect and encourage and foster that kind of contentious thinking, that kind of bridging gaps across new knowledge, knowledge that may be unpopular, knowledge that may challenge conventional wisdom, knowledge that may challenge the very institution. I tweeted earlier, some of you may have seen it, if not, it's in this Twitter, the Mac at the Mac, if anyone's looking at it, the Association of Universities and Colleges Canada definition of academic freedom. And part of that they include is freedom on a governance front, freedom from government intervention in what the university ought to do and what its faculty and what its community ought to be able to research and think about. So what does that have to do with you in your day-to-day jobs? That's part of what I want you to be thinking about today. In your jobs, in the work that you do, how do you support and strengthen academic freedom across the university? And what things can be threats to academic freedom that you need to be constantly challenging yourselves around? Think about the controversial event that's happening on campus, the symposium or the colloquium, and the risk that it could entail to a lovely place like this, to our property, to our buildings that we hold dear. How do you mitigate that risk without compromising academic freedom, without compromising that fundamental quality that makes us a university? Think about procurement. Think about financial services. You can imagine a scenario where we're doing exactly what we think we ought to do, where our government perhaps could create a policy that would say, we want to prioritize buying equipment from Canadian companies. It's good for the economy is still struggling, buy equipment from Canadian companies. Well, many of our researchers, I'm thinking about Michael Kolios, every piece of his equipment in his lab is a unique piece of equipment. Doesn't have like 3 other choices. If the government were to make that kind of policy, we would say as a university, we would stand up and we'd say, no, that compromises academic freedom. So think about all the different ways in the work that you're doing that you both are going to be encountering issues of academic freedom, whatever you do, and you have opportunities to think about how does the approach I take to my work help to foster, help to protect, help to encourage academic freedom, or how may it be perhaps not as encouraging, not as generative as academic freedom as it might be. This comes up all the time. It's in a way it's esoteric, but in a way it's very much part of the day-to-day work that we do. Many of you, all of you, hopefully know how we employ Soapbox to hear from our students about what they find challenging in the university, what they would like us to do better. There are lots of things that they would like us to administer better that are within the context and the academic freedom, the scope of academic decision-making of our colleagues, of our faculty colleagues. So on the one hand, it's a perfectly reasonable thing to say, I want my course syllabus, I know exactly what I want to have in there, and I want you to dictate the elements of the course syllabus so I can know exactly what textbooks are going to be required for this class before I register for it. And I want to actually see all those faculty surveys and the reviews of the faculty members teaching before I register for this class. In a way, it seems like a simple thing to do. In a way, in fact, it's a very complex thing to do because it very much intersects with the domain of the faculty member to determine his or her teaching syllabus, to determine how and when to deliver that material in the course of their teaching. So these aren't barriers to making change. But we have to know, and that's why these values are so important, that the change we make has to be in the context within these values that are critically important to being a university, to being a successful university. So think about that within the context of your work. The next value I want to talk about is collegiality. And it's a very interesting one because there are 2, I think, quite distinct elements in this definition of collegiality, and I want to pull them apart. On the one hand, there's collegiality and being collegial, I think in the more common sense of how we use it, which is really about being considerate of each other. I sent out a tweet this morning, and one of the responses I got was the most important element of leadership is kindness, and that was in response to talking about collegiality. So there's this element about expecting of leadership, expecting of co-workers to be kind and considerate and thoughtful of each other. And that's a typical way that we use the word collegial. And we think about in this context about interactions and collaboration. So that's one element of collegiality, and I may come back to that. The other element of collegiality, and the one that I particularly want to draw your attention to, is the idea of collegial governance, collegial decision-making, how decisions get made in a university, because I think that is critical to the work that each one of you does. The idea of the collegium as distinct from the bureaucracy is critical in a university. Now, we know what a bureaucracy is, but a bureaucracy in the technical sense is an institution or an organization run by experts. And basically, I and everybody else in this room, we're experts in the things that we do. That's why we're here. That's what we bring to the institution, is our expertise in our various fields, be it IT or law or human resources or finance or any other element of administration. That's what we bring. And that's what bureaucracy does in a technical sense. A university is, in a technical sense, a collegium. It is a place that is governed in its essence by the colleagues. And the most sort of obvious example of that is the University Senate. The University Senate is a dynamic group equivalent to the Board of Governors, equal to the Board of Governors that is chaired by Phyllis, who you heard from earlier. And the Senate is elected from among the academic colleagues, includes the deans, chaired by the president, and is the body that makes the determinations around academic governance for the university. So you think about it, it's something we've often had to explain to our board members at the Ryerson Board of Governors, that they think, well, we're the board, we make the decisions. They make the decisions around the finance and administration of the university, but all those academic decisions, those decisions that are really critical to the mission of the university, are decisions made by the Senate, by the departments, by the academic colleagues. And that sense of collegial decision-making, collegial governance is so critical to a university. And anyone who has worked anyplace else and then come to work at a university will feel that intrinsically. There's something different going on. You know, people will say about, we'll see, new legislation will come down, environmental health and safety, workplace violence legislation, and it will dictate, you must require that every person do the following. Do this training, do that thing. In a collegial governance world, we don't work very much in a you must do this kind of world. We work in a world of discussion and collaboration and critique and thinking through and challenging and conceptualizing, not so much a world in which you do what you're told and you go off and go on to the next thing. That is the world of a university. And I think that really does have an incredibly important effect, because what it means is that we all, the entire collegium, the colleagues from across the university, are intrinsic to delivery of the mission. The mission isn't delivered by the president. Sheldon will come up here, and just like he said, it's not that high school kids are saying, I've got to apply to Ryerson because Sheldon Levy's there. It's because of what everybody does together in delivery of the mission, and every decision around delivery of the mission is a decision of the full collegium. And that really, when you think about the academic plan, in what other kind of organization does the strategic plan for that organization not get approved by the leader? The president doesn't approve the strategic plan. The provost doesn't approve the strategic plan. The university senate, made up of faculty, from leaders from across all of the academic mission, those are the people who approve the plan. And without their approval, the plan doesn't go forward. It's a very different kind of environment. It's a very different kind of governance. And it has to underpin everything we do in our day-to-day lives. But it's both. That idea of collegiality is both that sense of governance and decision-making, and it's that sense of how do you interact with each other? How do you collaborate to build the shared communal mission? And both of those senses of collegiality have to govern how we do our work all the time. And they're intrinsic to the respectful and interesting and exciting and critical thinking kind of environment in which we all work. The last value that I want to talk a little bit about is enterprising. And this is one of my favorite ones to talk about, especially to groups like this. Because again, when we talk about Ryerson as an innovation university, talk about Ryerson as an entrepreneurial university, you can kind of understand that if you think about the digital media zone. And hopefully, people have had an opportunity, some of you to visit the digital media zone, some of you to know more about what it does. But you can think about being entrepreneurial and enterprising when it comes to starting a business, creating an app. All of that sort of makes sense. But what does it mean for you in your day-to-day work within the administration of the university to be enterprising? And what does that mean to be an entrepreneur in that context? And what we say when we talk about it in that context is that we want people to be intrapreneurial. We want people to take that same amount of enterprising, entrepreneurial thinking and devote it to the institution itself, to look into the work that you do, to look into your piece of the organization and think about how can I bring that entrepreneurial spirit that has served Ryerson so well through its path of change and bring that into the work that you do every day. It's for each and every one of you to be a champion of innovation and to be a creative thinker, and to find opportunities for innovation and change, and to take advantage of those opportunities, both individually and with your teams. I think the key is to find opportunities to pilot, because what does pilot mean? Pilot is a bit of a code. It means this may not work. So I'm going to pilot it, and it also means I probably don't have any money to do it. So it's got two strikes against it right there. But the idea of the pilot is you try something, it's an opportunity to experiment, and if it fails, it's just about learning. It's just about learning and moving forward. Because we know that there is no entrepreneurship, there is no true innovation without opening yourself up to some level of failure. If you just do the same thing over and over again, it's probably going to more or less result in the same ending. And there's low risk in that, reasonably speaking. On the other hand, there's incredibly high risk in that, because the world is changing, everything we're doing is changing, and unless we can change with it and continue to do incredible things for the university, but do them in different ways, we're not going to be able to keep the pace up. Entrepreneurs, like their entrepreneurial counterparts, aren't afraid to take risk. They aren't afraid to take some failure. They aren't afraid to look at the problem sideways and ask a question a different way. And if you ask questions a different way, you're likely to come up with a different solution. Being entrepreneurial often will mean talking in cross-functional teams, not just your team, but looking across the organization to who else can I bring into this problem to help solve it, to look at a different way, who may have a different perspective than mine. But it's also about thinking about the organization's priorities. So as the academic plan comes out in June, and as you're then further working within your departments to think about what does the plan for each of your departments look like, you're going to be thinking about being entrepreneurial, being enterprising within a context of the mission of the organization, within a context of the strategy and the priorities that the academic plan is going to set out. And this idea of innovation and entrepreneurship is so much a part of Ryerson's DNA, it makes sense that it's a part of everything that we do in our work. And there are many examples of how we can do that. And the digital media zone, the creation of the digital media zone is just probably the biggest, most showy, most fancy example of that.